Okay, can you guys see my screen?
Yep.
Yes.
All right. All right. So the GPS on benchmarks initiative, as we were just talking about, it's kind of a crowdsourced effort on the part of the NGS to get surveyors to contribute information for part of the modernization, it's called, of the National Spatial Reference System, or the NSRS. So is it just the government wanting free work, right? This is kind of the perception. I'm hoping to change that a little bit and convince you guys that it's an important part of modernization, and that really the reason it should matter to us is because it's in our own best interest as surveyors and as part of a geospatial community. Nowadays, you know, surveyors, what we do has a lot of effect, not just on property owners, but on people who are in mapping, in GIS, you know, as we set corners, and some of those, if you do much work for like ITD or something, some of that might end up in, you know, the multi-state control point database where GIS analysts are going to use it. There's a variety of ways, though, that our work can influence that broader geospatial community. And the GPS on Benchmarks initiative is one of those where the work that we do has a direct impact on other surveyors, as well as people who are in mapping and GIS. And so the point of this subject, like this presentation, is twofold. I want to talk a little bit about the modernization and what it is, but then also I want to talk about how the GPS on Benchmarks initiative plays into that, to see if you know, in Idaho we can get a little more participation in this. So modernization, you've probably all heard about this. Big subject. Everybody's kind of been waiting for it now for a number of years, but the NGS is replacing all of the datums in North America. We've been working in NAT 83, NAVD 88 now for a long time. That's our familiar territory, and there's a lot of questions about, you know, what is it going to look like when all of that's replaced. They're replacing all of those datums. The horizontal and vertical will be replaced. And there are some important differences between the new datums and the old one that'll affect how we do our work. So the new datums are built from GNSS data, right? They're from satellite geodesy, and they're built from gravity, and in particular the gravity for the redefinition of the American Vertical Datum, or GravD project. As you guys probably know, the previous datums, NAT 83, that was right at the beginning of GPS technology, brand spanking new. They were anticipating the changes in technology. They did a really good job building the datum, and it's served us well for all these years. However, it was at the beginning of that technology, and as technology has advanced, the NGS has decided, for some reasons we'll look at, that it's time to update the underlying datums to meet the needs that the new technology allows us to meet. So it's also, one way it's different, the new datums will be built on the International Terrestrial Reference Frame, and it's going to be temporally referenced. So this will be, I think, the hardest part for us surveyors to get used to. I don't think it'll be that bad, really, but I think this is probably the scariest part. Is we don't like our coordinates to change. We like things to stay the same over time. And I know some people are pretty bothered about the NGS moving to more of a dynamic datum where coordinates have a timestamp on them. But we'll talk a little bit about that. I don't think it'll be as bad as we're expecting. So these are the new datums that are coming out. The ones that will affect us really are just these two. The North American Terrestrial Reference Frame of 2022, or NatRef 2022. The name may change. from everything I've heard, including from just the other day, they're keeping this 2022 date associated with the new datums. But other than that, the names may change. So this is currently what they are anticipating they'll be called. The second one is a replacement of the vertical datum. NAVD88 will be replaced by the North American Pacific Geopotential datum of 2022. So I want to read this because this is where the rubber meets the road for us as surveyors. This is where I think it gives an insight into how the NGS is looking at these things now. For the last few decades, our concern for customers, let me move this, has put our focus for certain scientific facts on the back burner. The non-geocentricity of the NAD83 frames, the dynamic movements of geodetic control marks, and the changes of sea level were once viewed as less critical than maintaining the status quo. But the preponderance of centimeter positioning has made these issues glaringly obvious. NGS has therefore concluded the time is ripe to collect all of the long-delayed improvements to the NSRS and Modernized. We are scientists and civil servants both. It is the express hope of everyone at NGS that these changes, while intimidating at first, will eventually be embraced by our customers. We invite you along for the ride and hope you will help us to continue to improve the NSRS. So this is a little map that I created. This is, each of these arrows is on one of the core stations that are maintained by the NGS. And this information is available publicly. If any of you are interested in looking at any of this, let me know. I'd be happy to show you where I got some of this and how I did it. But with those core stations, they publish velocities on how those core stations, I want to say move, but it's a little deceptive. The North American plate is actually rotating counterclockwise, but the NGS, in order to mostly please surveyors, right, and those of us who don't want our coordinates to change, they've fixed NAD83 to the plate and kind of ignored the fact that the plate is moving. And so even though the plate's rotating clockwise, but you have to fudge the data a little bit, right? Relative to the world, the plate is moving clockwise, but we look at our velocities as being the plate as opposed to the rest of the world, if that makes sense. So each of these arrows is based on the published velocities for those cores. They're kind of scaled by size. So for the most part, most of the North American plate's moving at about the same speed and in the same direction. But you can see, especially along the West Coast, areas down around Texas, there's some areas where things are moving, quite a bit. There's a lot of change happening on the land and in the earth. And this is one of the reasons why the NGS has decided it's time to modernize. We've ignored these kinds of facts for a while, but to get true, accurate data, and especially if you're looking at it from, say, a scientific point of view and you want to work with people in other countries, that sort of thing, at some point you have to address these types of facts. And so that's why the NGS, this is one of the reasons why the NGS is updating the datums. And so if you're like me, you're asking, like, what does it mean, right? What does this mean for me as a surveyor? I'm going to go out and survey Farmer John's property, and I'm going to shoot a rebar at the corner of his property. And that's what I want. I want in 2-3 years, I want to be able to come back and be on that rebar, right? I don't want my coordinates to change. There are certain things that I, as a surveyor, am looking for. So the next little bit, I want to talk about some of the changes that you'll see as when these new datums launch, and then kind of give you my perspective on how we can work in this and how it can work for us. So one of the first changes in the quote I read before, you'll have noticed that it talked about the non-geocentricity of NAD83. Okay, the North American datum of 83, it was very well done, but it's a geocentric coordinate system, And where the center of the Earth was supposed to be, they missed it by about 2 meters. Really impressive work. But now with global positioning technology, we can see that 2 meters. And so they're going to shift the datums to be actually geocentric, and we'll see that roughly 2 meter shift in our coordinates as well. And so if you look on the map here, you can see right there through the middle of Idaho, we're at about 1.5 meters. Down in my neck of the woods, the southeast corner of Idaho, we're a little over 1.4. So roughly speaking, for all of us here, we're right around 1.5 meters in the horizontal change. As far as ellipsoid height change goes, and this is what your GPS reads if you don't have a geoid model set up, we are looking at negative 0.6, 0.5, somewhere in there, meters again. And so, roughly 1.5 feet, right? That is the ellipsoid height change. And so, that comes with the shift in the ellipsoid, but orthometric height is going to be a little different because that is changing as well to a gravity-based model. And what we're looking at in terms of a change here for orthometric heights is roughly 0.8 meters. You guys are probably getting up into that 1 meter range, but down here we're more about 0.8. So roughly that area. And I want to call your attention to a couple of things. These last few images, these are ones I pulled from the NGS. This one here, you'll notice down around Florida, they're really close, right? They're looking at 0 meters change. Up here, as you move north and westerly, you see that change grow. And the reason for this is most of NAVD88 is based on, well, I shouldn't say most, all of it is based on leveling, right? It's a leveling network across the United States. And so down in Florida area, they're pretty good, but you have this they call it bias and tilt. As you move northwesterly across the United States, you get greater and greater differences. And so to make these values true, and what we want as surveyors when we're talking our orthometric heights, really the question is like, where's water going to go, right? If I'm looking at elevations, I want to know which way is water going to flow. This is a kind of a large scale picture of the problems with NAVD88. We don't see it on a local level. Your elevation difference between two local benchmarks is probably very good, but taken as a whole country, there are some pretty big errors, and the NGS has decided it's time to correct that. So right here, this is one specific example, just to prove that what we're seeing on those graphics is the reality. I've taken the data from the Pocatello core station, and if you look over on the right hand side here, we have the ITRF coordinates, ITRF 2014, and then below that we have the NAD83 coordinates. And if you look at the latitude and longitude and height, ellipsoid height, you'll see that they're different. Okay. I mentioned earlier that NAD83 has been fixed to the plate, and we've kind of ignored the change relative to the rest of the world. This is really where you see it. Okay, the ITRF is the International Terrestrial Reference Frame, and NAD83 is the North American datum. And so you can plug this information in to this inverse 3D and see what the difference is between the North American datum and the International Terrestrial Reference Frame. I pulled the data for ITRF 2014 because that's all that was available. The datums, the new datums will actually be built on ITRF 2020, but they should be pretty close. This will be a pretty accurate estimation of the difference that we'll see here in Pocatello. So right here, you can see I plugged in the information and derived the differences. So our change in our height is 0.65 meters roughly, right? Right where we were seeing in their graphic. The mark to mark distance, we're looking at roughly 1.5 meters. To make it more applicable to you, I pulled a cores up in your area. This is the Galena cores. I'm not sure which one most of you guys use, but this will give you a good idea of your area as well. And you'll see when you put it in, you're looking at a change in your height of just under 0.6 meters and a mark-to-mark distance again of right around 1.5 meters. So that reflects your horizontal and vertical change that you can expect to see when the new datums launch in roughly 2025. So another way that the NGS has kind of changed their perspective in a way that will affect us is survey control. Most of us at some point or another have tied down some kind of a geodetic control marker. We found a benchmark, or we found an NGS mark to try to get on tied to the NSRS for, say, a government project horizontally, and taken a static observation on it. In some way, we've used or seen NGS control marks, and if we haven't, we've used PLSS corners, right? Monuments, survey monuments. In the past, historically, that's been the primary form of survey control. If you want to show that you are tied to the NSRS, you locate an official government mark with published coordinates, you tie that down, you tie your survey to that mark, and that's how you get on the NSRS. This is changing. Because that survey control is often localized and out of date. And what I mean by that is, if you've pulled data sheets recently, you've probably noticed some of them, it'll be say a benchmark. Nobody's actually observed that benchmark since 1967. Surveyors may have been on it, they may have leveled from it, but it has not been verified geodetically for decades. And similarly, over that time, as the Earth changes due to crustal motion, due to changes in groundwater, you can get subsidence or uplift where the ground elevation is actually changing and it's moving that mark with it. That benchmark might be accurate relative to another benchmark in the area, but since 1967, when it was observed, it's changed. And so the NGS is trying to move away from this, what's called passive control that can move with the ground. Here's an example of a benchmark in my area. They're trying to move away from that and move toward GPS-based control, CORS stations, things that are constantly monitored. If that station moves, you can detect that motion. And that traditional geodetic control, those survey marks, that'll still be important, but it's going to be moved to a secondary status. And we can talk a little bit about that here in a second as well. But this raises some important questions for us. Presumably, you guys have a lot of information that's been tied down in NAT 83, NAVD 88, right? You've done a lot of surveying over the years that is on these old datums. How do we relate that information to the new datums? The company I worked for before, we had base drawings, we had things that we put together where, you've surveyed it, you want to keep track of that information. It can help you with future projects, right? It doesn't just get memory hold. We want to be able to use it. And we need to have some way of taking that old data and relating it to the new data, right? Or the old data on the old datums and relate that to the new datums if we want to retain that usefulness of that information. And so looking at elevations in particular, NAVD 88, we have these benchmarks, they've been leveled. The elevations on those marks is based on that leveling project. And now we have a gravity-based model that varies by different amounts as you move across the country from the positions of those benchmarks. How do we relate those to each other? how do we take information that is based on a datum that's biased and tilted and relate that now to a datum that's based on gravity and is tied to GPS satellites. Okay, this is where the GPS on benchmarks comes in. So as you guys know, every so often we get a new geoid, right? Most of those geoids, this might be a little lesser known, most of those geoids recently are hybrid geoids. What the NGS has done is they've taken gravity models, they've created a gravity geoid, and then they've morphed it and altered it to fit GPS data that they have on benchmarks. So if they have GPS observation on a mark in your area, they'll actually change the geoid to try to fit into that old datum and make it look like they're the same. And this is what we've done now for a number of years. GPS on benchmarks have played an essential role in creating the newer hybrid geoid models, 12B and 18. And it also allows the NGS to verify their gravimetric models as they're creating these. Another way it matters, and this maybe not so much to surveyors, but to others in mapping and in GIS, is the transformation tools, right? This does affect us. We want to be able to transform our data between different datums. We want to be able to go from NAT 83 to the new NAPGD 2022, but we're looking at some transformation tools as well that are more mapping grade. And what that is based on is the information that we submit to the NGS as part of the GPS on benchmarks initiative. So right now, the NGS is allowing that information in. They've set the deadline to the end of this year, December 31st, 2022. It may change, but I wouldn't bank on it. I think it's important that we try to get some information in before that deadline. And the reason being is you can't build a model with an accurate model without data. And they can't build an accurate transformation tool without having the GPS observations specifically on these NAVD88 benchmarks. And so the NGS is part of, we'll look at some of their web maps as part of the GPS on benchmarks initiative. They've created maps where you can go in and you can see the information that they want and they need to build those transformation tools. With less data, you get greater uncertainties. This here is the map of Idaho in our area. The yellow hexagons, those are areas where the NGS is looking for marks. Those are their priority areas. The blue are kind of a second priority. It's important, but those are generally areas that are less populated. They don't need that information as much as what they need in the yellow areas. The green areas are areas that are done. And when I say done, what I mean is they've selected one of those, say, yellow circles represents an NGS mark, and they want 2 static observations on each of those marks in order to finish it. You have 1 observation, you submit it. The second one is kind of a verification. That's your redundancy, so they can make sure that it looks right. And when those are done, that hexagon will be, that information will be included in the transformation tool. The bigger gaps you have, the more areas that we see here that are in the yellow and blue by the end of the year, the greater uncertainty we'll have in our transformation tools in those areas. So Pocatello, I've been doing a lot of work down around Pocatello. This is a few weeks old, so that'll have changed a little bit. But you can see we've got a fair amount of green here, but most of the state, we just don't have much. And I want to call your guys' attention to, say, those yellow circles with the red dots on them. Those are marks that are almost done. They need 1 more observation on them, and submit that, and that area is done. Down around Twin Falls, there's a ton of them. there's a lot of area around Twin Falls that could be knocked out pretty quick. Same thing, Idaho Falls has a few. Up around Haley, you have a few. As you get up into some of that area, Arco and stuff, there's a lot of them. There's also not a lot of population. It would be good if we could get them, but I've been focusing on areas with cities, Pocatello, Malad. If we can get Idaho Falls, Twin Falls, that would be great. This is the overall view of the United States. You can see some states, I mean, they've knocked them out. Some states have basically finished their whole state. And then you get over into the Rocky Mountain region and we look pretty sad. Idaho doesn't have a whole lot. Nevada doesn't have a whole lot. Utah's doing pretty good down around the Salt Lake area. Parts of Montana have gotten pretty good. But really Idaho and Nevada in particular, we just don't have a lot of this information coming in. And the consequence of that is going to be that we have inferior data compared to surrounding states. Some of the other benefits that might interest you, as we submit these observations to the NGS, those marks that have been done will get 2020 reference epoch coordinates. Now, why does that matter? So we talked about how the new model that the NGS is following it has a time component. Coordinates will change as plates drift, as ground subsides or uplifts, those coordinates will change. Well, the reference epoch coordinates are kind of the compromise that they've made for folks like us. It gives you a snapshot of where things are at a particular time. And those are coordinates that'll stay consistent for 5 to 10 years. So if you need to tie to the National Spatial Reference System as part of one of your surveys, these marks that are submitted prior to that deadline, on rollout, they will have coordinates assigned to them that are in the new datums. And so where one of the ways I can see this mattering to surveyors in particular is initially I anticipate there will be some confusion, right? We get these new datums, horizontal and vertical. We want to know that we're working in them correctly, that our positions are accurate. How do we do that? Well, one of the ways we can do that is if we've submitted this information and you have a benchmark in your area that you've submitted to the NGS, you have a checkpoint. When the new datums come out and you're setting up your gear, you're creating your jobs, you're getting everything ready to start working in those new datums, you have a way now to verify that you are working in the new National Spatial Reference System, because you can check your GPS against that mark that has an up-to-date data sheet. But if those marks aren't submitted, we don't have that information. We don't have up-to-date coordinates. Repeat observations. So the reference epoch coordinates, because they're 5 to 10 years, they're considered a little lower grade. They have a little higher uncertainty in their positions than what are called these survey epoch coordinates. The survey epoch coordinates, those are mostly going to be useful, I think, to people who want to know if a mark is moving. They're actually trying to track that motion. That's where that'll be handy. Most of us, I think, will probably use these reference epoch coordinates. But our repeat observations, as we submit multiple observations on marks, those will be used to create those survey epoch coordinates. And so the takeaway from this, without us submitting data on these marks, we will have scarce data on those marks. It's really up to us. The NGS doesn't have it in their budget. They don't have it in their staff to go through and resurvey all 400 something thousand marks in the US. And so if we want to have access to that information, it's really on us to do that. So the process for GPS on benchmarks, I alluded to it earlier. We are looking right now at 4-hour observations, right? 2 4-hour observations on a mark. Preferably these are going to be on different days, different times of day, but you need that redundant observation. Now, that being said, one way I can see us as surveyors contributing to this without interrupting our workflows, because time is money. If you have a project that you're working on that's in the vicinity of one of these marks, and you're going to be doing an OPUS solution anyway on your project control, rather than set temporary project control, or rather than, you know, pick a section corner, say, and do a 4-hour observation on that, we can pick these benchmarks and do a 4-hour observation while our crews are gathering their data. And when we're done, if we've taken the photos, submit that information to the GPS on Benchmarks Initiative. Now, maybe you only do one, right? Maybe you have a 1-day project. You don't want to go out there a second time. That's okay. Other surveyors might be working in the area and hopefully see that those marks only need 1 more observation. And following the same line of reasoning, we can get some of these done. Are we going to get the whole state done? I don't know. I'd like to see us get as much done as we can, but there are ways, I think, as surveyors, that we can incorporate this into our workflow and get some of that information gathered and submitted without just doing free work, right? There are ways that I think we can plan our surveys so that we can contribute to this at the same time that we're doing the work we're already doing. So the standard process is those 2 4-hour plus observations. You want to take 1 close-up photo of the mark, clean it up, make it so the stamping's readable. The NGS wants to see that it is, in fact, that mark. They don't want kind of a vague, blurry, you know, brass cap. They want to be able to see that it's on the mark. You want to have a horizon view, so they can see where it's at. The next surveyor coming along, he can find that mark easier. Some of these are, you know, they have carcinite posts or witness posts set next to them. They're fairly easy to find. Some of them are not. Some of them, even if they had witness posts, they're gone. Those horizon views can really help you out. Another thing you want to do is update the description if something's changed. This isn't necessary. If you go out there and you find a mark that it's in great shape, looks just like the data sheet says it should look, your update on the description can be really simple. It can be something that's just found in good condition. If it does call out, references to the mark that are gone, witness posts are gone, power poles, things like that, it might be useful for the next guy coming along if you point out that those are missing. If the data sheet says that it's 5 feet from a power pole and the power pole is not there, you can save somebody some time by letting them know not to be looking 5 feet from the nearest power pole. And then after you've gathered that data, taken your photos, you want to submit this online through Opus Share. Real quick, have any of you submitted anything through Opus Share by chance?
No.
Have you done an Opus solution?
Yes, I have.
Okay, so the Opus Share is really simple. It's really easy. We'll have a look at that. I'll kind of show you the process. It's really not bad. Real quick, before we get to that, some tips and tricks. Orient your GPS antenna to the north. That's something that the NGS asks for. When they calibrate these antennas, they do it with the antenna oriented north, and so you get consistent results if you do that. I don't know how big of a difference it makes. I can't imagine it's very much, but it is something that the NGS asks that you do. You want to take a horizon view of the mark facing south if possible, just for consistency's sake. It doesn't have to be, if looking south you can't see anything, take a horizon view that is useful. But if south is as good as anything else, take it facing south. The marks don't have to be listed as priority marks. So the map we looked at earlier, recall there were those yellow circles all over the place. Those are their identified priority marks. It does not have to be one of those marks. They've selected those because they meet certain criteria, but you can find another mark that meets that criteria. If you're in that same hexagon and there's another mark that works better for you, you can use it, but make sure it's a stable mark. You don't want to just grab, something with a stability of D or something that may have moved over the years. Look at the data sheet, pick something that has a mark stability listed of A, B, or C.